Okay, welcome to the second webinar of the series devoted to argumentation. Last year we did the first one, which was classical argumentation, that you can find it at Dr.Net. Today, I will present the type called Rogerian or dialectical argumentation, which looks for common grounds of opposite views on an issue. As usual, let's begin with a quotation. This one summarizes the nature of the dialectical argumentation, which is try to arrive at truth through a conversation between two actors or an author and their audience that have opposite positions about something by means of finding common ground. Of course, what I have already said is certainly a simplification of that kind of argumentation, but it is a didactic tool to get the gist of a process that has been developed since the classical Greek philosophers to modern ones, including Hegel and Marx. This is the agenda for today. It will help you have a basic view of a type of an element of academic writing that is complex and which involves a very active process, different skills, and especially the ability to view an issue from more than one position. As usually, the webinar includes guidelines to improve the target ability, and this specific webinar also provides you with an example of dialectic argumentation that you can find under the handout tab. For the ones that couldn't attend today, the example will be sent to you. Since argumentation is always a complex issue, it is a good idea to clarify some related concepts so you can have a clear picture of the framework into which dialectic argumentation is inserted. You may ask why. Because you cannot master what you don't understand. That's simple. I will present you the concepts of rhetoric, logic, and dialectics. Rhetoric is usually associated to politicians, communicators, and educators. And perhaps the first idea we have when we hear the word is that it is used to convince us of something. There are many definitions of it. I have chosen this one because it illustrates the complexity behind the term. Rhetoric appeals to our basic characteristic of being creatures made in symbolic exchanges. As Wendy Booth, who was an American literary critic, he says that we are creatures that are developed in the process of sharing intentions, values, meanings, and more commonalities than differences. We are basically rhetorical animals whose nature is discovered and lived in symbolic processes. And these days we're having a look at that. Therefore, rhetoric refers to the study and uses of written, spoken, or visual language to organize and maintain social groups, construct meanings and identities, coordinate behavior, mediate power, produce change, and create knowledge. A lot of things, in fact. In other words, to convince people. That's the goal of rhetoric. Now, we enter into the realm of Mr. Spock's beloved logic. The term logic came from the Greek word logos, which is sometimes translated as sentence or discourse or reason or rule and ration. Different translation for just one short word. Of course, These translations are not enough to help us understand the more specialized meaning of logic as it is used today. Logical reasoning, or just logic for short, is one of the fundamental skills of effective thinking. It works by raising questions like, Alan says, hi, are we waiting? Or is there something to do to get the discussion that I haven't done? Thank you. Or you can ask any question, Alan, whenever you want. You can write it down on the box, or you can wait till the end, as you wish, okay? Okay, are you all listening to what I'm saying? Let me check that. Okay. So let me say it again, that logical reasoning, or just logic, is one of the fundamental skills of effective thinking. And it works by raising questions like, if this is true, what else must be true? Or, if this is true, what else is probably true? Or, if this isn't true, what else can't be true? See? And these are all inferences. That's the problem. Alan has to check. Okay. So, when you ask these questions and you answer them, then you are making inferences. In other words, they are connections between a given sentence, which is called the premise, and another sentence, which is called the conclusion. Inferences are the basic building blocks of logical reasoning, and there are strict rules governing what counts as a valid inference and what doesn't. It's a lot like math, but applied to sentences rather than numbers. It is important for arguing because it rules the validity of the reasoning process and outcome. That's what it is, logic. Welcome, Lisa. So when you talk about logic, you start with a premise and you get to a conclusion, but in the middle of those 2 points, you have to make inferences. Now, it's time to define dialectics. Like the other concepts, it has been proved to be difficult to agree on one comprehensive definition. That is why I decided to present a general and well-known one, so the philosophical complexities don't overshadow the point that you need to understand. Dialectic is an interpretative method in which the contradiction between 2 positions is resolved by finding common grounds. Something like, okay, I have a position, you have another one, but let's try to find something in common, okay? In fact, that's the method that Socrates used to help his students get to the truth. Well, at least what was said by Plato. Think of it as a conversation between 2 people who don't agree at the beginning, but who at the end find something in common to achieve some level of agreement. Adrian says, if A, then B doesn't imply if B, then A, for example, doesn't necessarily imply. Yeah, if given a premise, if A is true, then B not necessarily imply that B is true or is wrong. Okay, that's the idea behind logic, and in this case, behind dialectics, what we are trying to do is to find a conclusion that in certain way illustrates both opposite points of view in terms of a common ground. Okay. Now you may ask, why are those concepts important to understand? Because they have been related to argumentation in different ways. For instance, one position has established that each is a perspective on argument. So that when you, when you use dialectics, or when you use logic, or when we use rhetoric, each one of them is a different perspective of the same thing, that is argumentation. More specifically, rhetoric has been said that is concerned with the process of argumentation, dialectics with its procedures, and logic with its product. That's one position. Others have said that rhetoric, dialectics, and logic each applies to a different objective of argument. Each one is applied to a different objective of argument and argumentation, of course. And they say that in particular, rhetorical argumentation is supposedly the use of argument to influence conduct, a different purpose. However, even argument used to influence people or people's conduct is subject to dialectical and logical norms. It has also been postulated that in argumentation, rhetoric and dialectics reflect different paradigmatic contexts. So, the rhetorical properties typically associated with argumentation owe to its nature in the context of speeches, where there is a non-interactive, often heterogeneous audience. That's one point of view. Okay, forget rhetoric is a kind of argumentation that you use in speeches when you do not interact with the audience. Whereas the dialectic properties typically are associated with argumentation that is done in conversational exchanges, where there are two or a small number of interacted people trading turns and arguments. Okay, they say, okay, dialectics is the kind of argumentation that you use when you are trying to exchange idea with another person or more than another person. Logic, as applied to argumentation, it's been said that it's the descriptive or the normative study of the norms of reasonableness of arguments used in either speeches or conversation. And then they say, okay, logic is something different. Logic is what you have to find in either speeches or conversation, but that is absolutely related to reasoning. Is the reasoning appropriate? Is it valid or not? Okay, so despite all this position that I am telling you, just so you have an idea of what they are, what the relationship among them is, what is important for you is that each of these concepts is related to the process of argumentation, and therefore you have at least to know what they are. That's the only thing that you have to know, that all three concepts are related to argumentation, can be used in argumentation. Adrian says, if we can see something, then it exists. That's the thesis. Okay. If we can't see something, then it doesn't exist. Things can exist, sound, frequencies, oxygen, whether we can see it or not. That's the thesis. Well, the reason will be, if we can see something, then it exists. If we can't see something, then it is probably that it doesn't exist. Is probably because, as you said, there are things that you cannot see but exist. That's part of what reasoning is, and is part of why sometimes, we are going to talk about a little about that in some minutes, but sometimes your arguments are not valid because you have included a fallacy in the process of reasoning, and we are going to talk about that. Okay, so since it is a complex issue, it has not been easy to develop a single and widely accepted definition of argumentation. There are many definitions of it, well collaborated, which means that we have at least to know what common grounds definitions of argumentation have in order to understand this concept. And that's what we're going to say. Usually, to understand a complex term, it's a good idea to begin by describing what it is not. In this case, argumentation is far from being an action based only on opinions, an absence of logical reasoning or empirical evidence. That's not argumentation. Neither it is a matter of providing just facts without ideas that can be challenged and discussed. You cannot say that you are building an argument just because you include only facts. From these 2 points, we can infer that argumentation supposes a supported discussion of points of view. And that's important, the word supported discussion of points of view. That discussion cannot include wrong courses of thinking, either deliberately or not, because its result would be invalid and therefore would not be useful to convince people. That's when you include fallacies, and those wrong courses of thinking make your argumentation not valid. So if argumentation cannot be based on opinions, or include just facts, or have absence of ideas to discuss, or wrong thinking, then what it is? Let's see what it is. To know what argumentation is, we need to look at different concepts of it and infer what they have in common. The first definition is focused on argumentation as a process. The second one establishes its main goal. The third definition presents two main elements of it, claim and evidence, while emphasizing that it is a process. And the final definition extends the idea from an individual process to a social one. So these are only four of the many definitions of argumentation that have been created. And as you can see, each one of them has a different focus from a focus on the process to another one on its goal and what for, to another one with the elements of it, because an argument has two parts, a claim and evidence to support that claim. You make an affirmation, you affirm something, and then you have to provide the evidence to support that claim. And even it has been conceived even as an individual or a social process. So if we have so many concepts, how are we going to have a good idea of what argumentation is? Well, let's try focusing on the elements, okay? We can say, when we analyze all those definitions, we can say that argumentation is a thinking process performed to convince others in order to resolve problems, answer questions, settle issues, and dispute, which makes it, at the end, in a social process. And that goal is achieved by means of providing claims, reasons, and evidence, which are the parts that form argument. So that is how argumentation is, at the end, conceived. We can say that argumentation is a thinking tool that may be produced in both oral and written form to help us create more functional and balanced environments for us to act as individuals and members of society. So we create arguments, we discuss those arguments, we try to convince people about the validity of those arguments, and that help our society and we as individuals to be more functional, to create new things, to create knowledge. Okay? Okay. If you are wondering, why should I learn argumentation, please? That's so complex. What I have to learn it? What for? Well, you may even say, I'm not a philosopher, so why should I learn argumentation? Well, here you have the main reasons to invest time in improving your ability to perform argumentation, especially in academic writing. As you know, critical thinking and analysis are two tasks students are asked to do, and they cannot be done without arguing for and against different positions. That's the first reason. It is also true that disciplines revolve around argumentation to produce advances in their areas, which means changes in concepts, theories, approaches, etc. So whenever a discipline realizes the need to change a concept or a theory or an approach, argumentation has to be used in order to convince people of the need to change something. Besides, it is needed to solve problems. make decisions, and create new ways of thinking and acting. So it's not just a thing that is done only by philosophers, because we in our daily life use it many times without consciously realizing that that is what we are doing. Okay, when you try to solve a problem, you have to create arguments, and the same way you have to make decisions. So learning, which is a basic element of individuals and societies, is improved when people perform argumentation, because it becomes more durable and significant. In summary, progress and quality of life are fostered by argumentation. Isn't it great? It is. In fact, it is. And then you may ask, why do I need to perform argument well? Well, knowing what it demands from you is, after understanding its nature, a necessary step to master. First, you understand in a general way what we are talking about, and then you have to know about what argumentation demands from us to do it well. Some of the skills you need to argue it well are presented in this slide. Of course, it is not an exhaustive list, but they are in fact the basic ones. To make good arguments, you need to establish the causes behind your claims. In other words, why do you think your claims are true? You have to make that explicit in your argument. You have to be able to provide evidence that can be evaluated to support what you believe is true. In other words, on what you base your claim. What can you provide to convince people of the truthfulness of what you say? So it's not, I said it and it's true. No, you make a claim, but you have to provide enough valid evidence to support that claim so we can establish the degree of truthfulness that it has. You also have to be able to think of other possible views of the same event, situation, problem, belief, etc. Because it's not only your point of view, but there are other people may have different points of view. So you have to ask, what is also logical or possible to happen? This skill is very important in dialectic argumentation, and you will see why today. You also have to think of reasons why those other options are not as good as your claim. If you want to convince by means of your claim, you have to convince people that other positions are not as good as yours. In other words, you have to ask, what makes my argument, or what makes other arguments not valid or plausible? And you also have to refute those other options using logical and feasible reasons and evidence. Welcome, Joy. And to do that, you need to ask, how can you prove those options' weaknesses? So these are abilities that argumentation requires, and as you can see, they are focused on analyzing, foreseeing, evaluating, and proving. So To be considered convincing, your arguments have to satisfy some criteria. I mean, it's not only to create a claim, provide evidence, but the whole process of arguing has to satisfy some criteria. Those criteria are sometimes defined in very complex terms, especially when they are applied to areas like artificial intelligence, for example. However, and you have to relax, the goal of this webinar is to introduce you to the basics of the field of argumentation in general and dialectics specifically, and therefore I will limit this presentation to that goal. I mean, this is a so complex area that if we do not have very clear the goal that is stated for the presentation, we can get into an endless discussion of all the things that are involved in them. But let's check these criteria. The first criterion you have to satisfy is the creation of argument that is clear and ambiguous. An argument that cannot be confused with another one. And that's very, very, very important when you are creating or developing your dissertation. Okay, that's the first thing. The claim of that argument should also have to be supported by enough and strong evidence that makes it credible. Okay. First is clear, second, it is supported. Besides, the conclusion of the argument should be congruent to it. In other words, the connection between the claim and the evidence should provide good reasons to accept the conclusion because the evidence is really relevant to the claim. If your evidence does not support, is not relevant to what you are claiming, then the conclusion is useless. It's useless because you are using something that is not important or that in fact doesn't support your claim. So the argument should not have unstated conclusions or insufficient evidence. And finally, the claim and the evidence should be logically and factually true to really support the conclusion made from them. In summary, the criteria that arguments should satisfy are focused on their coherence and congruence. This is very useful when you have to make conclusion about your research studies because they are in fact based on arguments, claims that you propose using the evidence obtained through the collected data. That's why you have to learn how to do argumentation, okay? Because whatever you say in a discussion of a content, whatever you say in your dissertation or in a paper that you write, your claims have to use evidence obtained through the collected data, and your conclusion should be coherent and congruent to what the data said, not what you wanted it to say, but what it really says. Okay? So far, I have presented the skills you need to perform argumentation well and the criteria it has to satisfy. And the good news is that all those skills can be learned and improved. And this webinar is on that line of thought. You can learn how to argue in a valid and convincing way. Now, let's talk about the focus of today's webinar, the Rogerian or dialectical argumentation. It is called in that way because it is based on the dialectical method, and Rogerian because it is based on some ideas of the psychologist Carl Rogers. Rogerian argument is a negotiating strategy in which common goals are identified and opposing views are described as subjectively as possible in an effort to establish common ground and reach an agreement. The three main components of a Rogerian argumentation are the core argument, the common ground, and the link that may associate the opposite views. The goal is to achieve a compromise between the position so both sides can benefit from the agreement. That characteristic makes this type of argumentation an example of the dialectical approach. Whereas traditional or Aristotelian argument focus on winning, what is important is to win, the Rogerian model seeks a satisfactory solution for both sides. So you see, one is, the classical one is to a certain extent an individual process because it has an individual goal. I want to win. But this Rogerian type of argumentation tries to say, okay, I want to convince you about something, you want to convince me about something. Let's see how we can agree on a win-win solution. In this kind of argument, the author attempts to do three things. First, to convey to the reader or the person who this author is talking to, is to convey that they are understood. That's the first thing. I have to know that I'm being clear enough so you can understand my point of view. Second, to delineate the area within which the author believes the reader or listener's position to be valid. And that means that you make clear, okay, this is my position, this is your position, but let's check if there is any common point there. And third, to induce them to believe that they and the author share similar moral qualities. That's one of the tools that is used, okay? You apply or you try to convince the other part that you both share certain moral or certain qualities like honesty, integrity, and goodwill, and also aspiration, the desire to discover an acceptable solution for both parts. It's good to stress, and this is important, that these are only tasks, not stages of the argument. These are your objective, to convey that, to be sure that you are being understood, that you have listened or at least read the other position, and that you both could find a common ground in terms of things that you share, like moral qualities or aspirations, okay? The goal is to create a situation conducive to cooperation. Adrian says the Rogerian model looks very much like the 5-paragraph argumentative essays that we were taught to write in high school? Yeah, probably yes. I mean, the idea is that you have to share things, to discuss things, but trying not to push your solution on the other part of the discussion, but that you can say, okay, I think my position is good. It has many, many advantages, but I also can say that your position has some things that are very interesting too. So let's try to find out a solution which have elements from both parts. And that recognition of what the other person has said and you consider true can pave the road to an agreement, because the other person says, okay, this person has different points of view, but is willing to take into account my ideas too. And that makes a very important change of mind. Okay. When presented your case and the case of the other side, the style is flexible when how you set up your information and how long you spend on each section. I mean, there are no fixed guidelines. You have to do this and this and this, and you have to devote this percentage of time to do this or to do that. But you want to be balanced. Why? Because spending an inordinate amount of time on your position and only giving lip service to the other side, for example, defeats the purpose of using the Rogerian style. Okay? Because if you just take a very little from the other point of view, just that, I'm taking you into account, that is against the whole process, the whole dialectical process. But now let's see a guideline to apply or to do Rogerian argumentation. This is an example of how your Rogerian argumentation looks like. Have an introduction in which you present the topic as a problem to solve together rather than an issue. Okay? You change the style and you present it as something that we both have to solve, instead of, this is a problem because I think this and you think other opposite thing. Then you present the opposite views, for example. So you state the opinion of your opposition in an objective manner that is fair and accurate. So you don't change meanings. You don't use ambiguous words to make the other position dark or not understandable. So the other side knows that you understand its position and that you are willing to take that position into account. Then you present the context for the opposing position. Show the position that you understand under what circumstances its position is valid. Then you begin to pull into your position, but you do it in a subtle manner because you say, okay, your point of view is very interesting, providing that we have a scenario in which this happens, or providing that we have circumstances like these ones. Then you present your position. You present your position objectively. Yes, you want to be convincing, but you want the opposition to see to see your position with clarity and fairly as well, just as you presented his position early. So it's a matter that you present first the opposite position in a fair way, in a clear way, and then you present yours in the same way too. And you create the context for your position. Show the opposition context in which your position is also valid. You have already said your ideas are valid in this context, within this, with these circumstances. And now you do the same for your position. And finally, you talk about the benefits. You appeal to the opposition and show how elements of your position could work to benefit his interest, the interest of the other position too. So you begin by introducing the problem as something that can be solved working together. Then you summarize the views of your opposite part. You discuss in which context that position can be true or can be valid. Then you present yours and do the same with the context within it. Your position is valid. And then you discuss the benefit of your position and try to convince the other part that the benefits of your position also are benefit for them. Okay. Now, here you have an infographic that gives you guidelines about how to develop a Rogerian argument. This is only a possible course of action, since you use one type of rhetoric when discussing your position with people who already agreed with you. Okay? It's one of the possible things that you can use. And to discuss your position with the opposition, you need to tone that down and break it into objective elements so the sides can more easily see areas of common ground. In other words, if you are sure that that your audience is completely in favor of your position, you do the thing very directly. You make the argumentation very directly. But when you know that there are different positions, then what you can do is to take your position and divide it into different elements. So we discuss one element, get to an agreement, then go to the next one and see if we can get to another agreement or not. And then in that way, step by step, element by element, you can find common ground to move into the agreement. So taking the time to state the opposing side's arguments and context means the opposition has less reason to get defensive and stop listening to your ideas. And that's very reasonable. If you spend time discussing the opposite view and you do it in a fair way, then you cannot be accused of not taking into account that position. Or to say, I'm not going to listen to you because you don't pay attention to me. Okay, so it's a kind of strategy in order to assure that both sides can listen to each other. However, this guide may help you organize your argument and through practice develop your own course of action. I mean, this is one way of doing it. But if you begin to use it, and you begin to get used to it, it is very probable that you can design your own course of action, because you will say, okay, this part is too difficult to do it in this way. Let me find another way of doing it. And this is very advisable because you need to have enough cognitive flexibility to adapt your argumentation to the peculiarities of each situation. I mean, this is not a recipe that can always be applied in the same way during the same time. No, this is a guide so you can develop other courses of action which are based on this, but that you have refined enough in order to be used in different contexts. Okay, and that makes it really useful. In that sense, it's more useful than if you have a recipe, because this can be make you able to face different situations and still be consciously coherent, congruent, and having a good result. Now you may say, okay, I see, I need a lot of skills to do this, and okay, I have one course of action and a description of what should I have at the end, the product. But by the way, the document, the example on the handouts tab, and that is going to be sent to all the people who register here, is a good example of how to do an argumentative text based on Rogerian approach. But it is also important to know, how can I improve my skills to do argumentation? The ideas that I'm going to present now can help you with any kind of argumentation, traditional, Rogerian, analytical, and other kinds, because they focus on organizing your ideas so as to have the input information clear enough to achieve your goals. So it's not just to do Rogerian argumentation, it's to do argumentation in general. Okay, the first tool is a group of steps that can help you develop an argumentative paper. It is important to point that any writer begins with a preparation stage, and that's even more necessary when writing an argumentative text. Why? Oh, because the kind of goal and elements involving it. You are trying to convince people. So you have to prepare a paper or a text, oral or written, that can do that. And that means that you need to prepare yourself to do that. That's why the first step is focus on pre-writing activities, which guide you to gather essential information like what you want to argue and refute, and the specific claim you want to make. Also, what the problem or issue is, your position, and other people's view in relation to it. Since the validity of a claim is based on the evidence that supports it, you have to find that evidence and then do a deep analysis of it. To do that, you have to search sources and select the most appropriate ones to support and refute all the points of view. including yours. You also need to make annotation of what the evidence is and how it really supports the different claims. Yeah, this evidence supports this claim, this supports mine, and this one. To make the support explicit, you need direct quotations and paraphrased ones. But let me remind you something. Not all quotations can be direct ones. In fact, the University of Adelaide Writing Center has explained this point in a very, very clear way that I want to use now. They say this: you should paraphrase first to demonstrate your understanding of the ideas of the author. If you can say it in your own words, you have understood it. If you can't say it in your own words, go and read again. Second, you paraphrase to assist your readers by explaining difficult concepts or terminology. You should paraphrase when the original ideas are impressive, but the original wording is less so. Good idea, but not well expressed, or expressed too complicated for my audience. Therefore, I paraphrase it. You paraphrase when you want to change the emphasis of the idea to better match your own context. So you say the same idea, but you do it in a way that matches the style of your text. And you paraphrase to avoid overuse of direct quotes and the consequent risk of losing your own voice. You have to create your own voice on the text. So any person who reads you or listens to you say, wait a minute, this person is, or this writer is using their own voice, is how they say it, and not how other people say it. You say, okay, that's clear, but when should I quote directly? When the original wording is engaging for the reader and you feel you could not match this. Okay, it's so well said that I don't dare to change those incredible words. You quote if the quote is particularly well known. When you are quoting something that has been said by people like, for instance, Einstein or Steve Jobs, and everybody knows that, so you can quote. And also where the exact words of an authority would lend support to your own ideas. You have presented your own ideas, and then you say, okay, this person who is a very well-known field expert say this that really is on the same line of thought of my ideas. And finally, when you want to give the author's exact position, you don't want to mess up with the writer's position, and you use it. Of course, many people, especially new students, may say, oh, but I'm always on all these situations, so I can always use direct quotations. Well, it has been said that you have, if you are going to use direct quotations, the number of them in the whole text may be or should be less than 10% of what you said in your text. Okay, during the whole process, you have to argue logically. You have to avoid fallacies, and you have to use an academic tone. That's what it says, remember to. And then I want to tell you that remember that a fallacy is a kind of error in reasoning or a failure to provide adequate proof for a belief. And you may say, how come? Well, let me give you two examples. There is, for instance, a fallacy called confirmation bias, which is the tendency to look for evidence in favor of a hypothesis and not to look for this confirming evidence or to pay insufficient attention to it. This is very frequently found in research study when opposite views are not considered. You are providing support for your data or for your conclusions in your dissertation, but you do not include different points of view. And sometimes you say, there are not opposite views that I have found in the literature. Have you really looked for them? And that's the point. Or have you just focused on finding what is for your position and not against your position? And there is another example, which is called the bandwagon appeal. This is great. When you suggest that someone's claim is correct simply because it's what most everyone is coming to believe. Everyone think that that's true, so I say that is true. For instance, more teachers are using this strategy each school year. Therefore, you should use it. Wait a minute. What? Wait a minute. Is a matter of being on fashion, or is a matter of being enough evidence to support the point of view? Which one it is? Okay, another useful tool to prepare your argumentative paper is what is called PAPA approach, that lets you ask some questions to guide your decisions. If you have a look at the questions presented in the slide, you will realize they are intending to make you think of your goal, the audience, the way you want to word your ideas, and what your specific argument is before you try to write anything or say anything. Therefore, preparation is again the clue to success. Before writing, before talking, I have to clarify this. What is my purpose? What is my audience? What is the person or the ideas that I want to explain? What is the argument that I need? Okay, another guiding tool is this argument sheet. It lets you have a quick but illustrative view of what you are dealing with, since it presents the target of the argumentation, the claim, the evidence, the reasons for your beliefs, possible opposite positions, and the ideas you can use to refute disagreements. It also gives you prompts that can be used to introduce your writing, and all the things makes it a practical tool. So you say, okay, my problem question is, and you write it there. Then the claim or my belief is, I think that, or any other, or in my opinion, or for me, or personally, whatever you want to say. Then data or evidence. My evidence for this is this, or I said this because of this. Then the reason. This evidence supports my idea because, or I do not think that this is correct because, or you prepare your counter argument. Someone might argue against my idea by saying that, and then you refuse that thing and you say, If someone might not agree with me, I would convince them to or by doing this. It's very useful. It's a very simple tool, but if you use it before writing, it will be useful to focus your work. And the final tool is a table that summarizes the different stages that you may use to develop classical and Rogerian argumentation. In the next webinar, I will include analytical argumentation in this table, which is the focus of my next webinar in June. Okay, so you choose your goal and then may use one of these outlines, which of course are only an example of what can be done to develop argumentative text. This table, together with the infographics and the example in the handout tab, can help you write good argumentative text. What you have to do is to use them, to practice. The more you practice, the easier it will be to create good quality argumentation. And these are the main ideas of today from my point of view. What are yours? You tell me there. And the next slide shows the references used today. So I hope you have found this webinar useful, and I'm open to your questions, comments, or anything that you want to share. I know that this is a very complex topic. I have tried to simplify it for you. Oh, Adrian, of course, go, dear, go. Okay. Thank you, Monique, for coming here. And thank you, Joy, too. Okay, I hope to see you in June when we are going to talk about analytical argumentation. So let's finish this recording, and thank you for coming, and also thank you for registering. See you.